Hey everyone, it's Micah at Service Reef, and we had a great interview today with Jessica Arnette, who was until very recently serving as the director for Global X, which is a large sending agency. They would send tons of teams, and through doing it at scale, there's a lot of really fun lessons that she learned in the process. And so I'd love for you to be able to take some time and just get some real practical help and think about some of the ways in which you're structuring your process for sending and relate it to what Jessica was able to share today. Let's take a listen. So we are with Jessica Arnette, who until very recently was the director of mobilization. Is that the right title, Jessica?
There's so many titles you could use: systems director, services director, but yes, pretty much mobilizing the people.
That's awesome. Well, tell me a little bit about yourself and your passions. How did you even end up in this role?
Oh gosh. So my love of missions started, like I think we hope many people do, when I was a teenager at my local church and youth group. So I did my first missions at the time, missions trip, when I was 16 with Young Life, the organization, down to Costa Rica. It was rough first trip down to Costa Rica with a bunch of high schoolers. But I grew up, I didn't travel a whole lot. I grew up in inner city of Tampa. And so that was pretty much my world. I didn't have a lot, but to go to another country for the first time at 16 and see what real poverty was like, really just opened my eyes, and gave me a heart for the rest of the world. Realized America is quite a bubble. We are, we are quite sheltered where we are. And so that's where it started. And then grew up going to church and traveled some more in college. And thankfully, position opened up at my local church where I was working in missions, and I've jumped on it, where I could use my specific skills to help missions.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit about your specific skills and the talents that you kind of brought into that. And then, like, how did that change over the time in which you were there?
So before I was with the missions department, I was working in analytics. So I have a background in engineering. I have strong analytical skills. And so at the time, my church was just looking to grow. This was pre-COVID. And so that's why I was brought on, because I could look at the current. They didn't have a lot of systems in place, or if they did, they were fairly new and not equipped to send thousands and thousands of people a year on trips. So that's initially why I was brought in. I ended up overseeing a lot. I oversaw logistics, finances, budgeting, data analysis, a lot of predictive type of stuff for trip planning and number of trips and size of trips and locations and that sort of thing. So it was pretty broad scope. Project management sort of fell under me. I didn't necessarily do that. That's what Michaela Moore did that, but that was under my department as well.
That's awesome. What do you think was the most difficult part of being a missions kind of mobilization leader?
Oh gosh, I think definitely connecting the dots between the heart for just going out and serving what people had, and how much detail is involved in making those things happen. I think connecting those two dots, the amount of care and time that's required to put together a safe and effective journey is a lot. And to do that over and over and over again, dozens and dozens of times a season, requires a lot of planning. There was no room for any kind of ad hoc, or very much ad hoc, changes.
I'd imagine, and especially with the size of the church that you were serving in, when you get to that size, Jessica, you have to have a structure, right? And so in that space, you're like, okay, this is kind of the process. How did you get other leaders on board? Or how did you help navigate kind of that external, like, hey, if we're going to go, these are kind of how we're going to do it, or cast that vision for maybe how they came on board?
I had the most success with really laying out the timeline there was really a disconnect for why certain things required so much time. So really laying it out, like, this is when, if we're going to send large groups of people, well, this is when group ticketing needs to happen. And these are the locations we're sending people to, which really does require group ticketing, because otherwise, you risk not being able to find those flights. So that really helped. And also so not only was airfare a big part of that timeline, but also registering people, and hey, you want people to go through a training? Well, this is how much time it takes to train. So therefore, let's back that up. Oh, you need people to fundraise? This is how long it takes people to fundraise thousands of dollars. So really line it out and saying, like, these are not arbitrary dates that we're giving you. They're if this, then that kind of situation.
Yeah, actually, so since you are so analytical, help me understand, like, put some practical on that. Like, what was group travel? Obviously, you want that at least 90 days out, right? You want to kind of finalize your team by that point. So that means you're at least recruiting 30 to 60 days prior to that. So you're talking 120, 150 days out. Like, give me kind of like your mindset of, like, what did you guys discover over time? How long did it take people to fundraise? How long did it take people to train? Do you remember any of those details?
Oh, yes, for sure. I mean, for our process, which was, it was combined, it was sort of a combination of both fundraising and training, because we were pretty heavy on preparing teams ahead of time. But either both of those seemed to take about 4 months. 4 months to me was ideal, that you have a team in place, like people are signed up 4 months prior to the trip going. That was our sweet spot. So it gave time for meetings to happen, to uh, explain to people why they needed how to fundraise. And of course, there's always a lag in telling people they need to fundraise and then them actually doing that. And then having milestones in place along the way for them to, that lined up with when we were paying for airfare and partners and insurance and that sort of thing. But 4 months to me was perfect. More than that, and there wasn't enough there wasn't enough like urgency, and less than that, there wasn't enough time.
No, that's perfect. And so help me understand, like, when you're thinking through participation, and especially coming from an analytics background and where you came from, what were ways in which you found, either at the church level or within kind of the mission space specifically, how did you track engagement? What were things that you tried and maybe didn't use, or tried and actually found successful? Were there different ways that you tried to measure the engagement of folks?
Uh, yes, returners. We would track. That's probably within missions specifically. The church in general has a very detailed plan for tracking engagement. That's giving, serving, joining a group. That was our church's model for engagement. But within missions, it was people coming back, leaders coming back. Surprisingly, well, it was surprising when I first saw it. We have a lot of first timers. We had a lot of first timers coming into missions. They'd never done it before. I mean, we're talking some years 30 to 50% of the people that were on our journeys had never been on either a Global X journey or any kind of missions trip. Global X being my church's name for missions, but so that the returners was something that we just really started looking at, because that's how you generate leaders. That's how you generate, word of mouth. If people aren't coming back, they're not telling people to go on a trip. So, so that kind of measures. Those are your, what's the word I'm looking for? Your raving fans, the ones that are coming back over and over again.
Was there anything that you did, realizing that that was kind of the goal, Jessica? Like, what was there anything that you did from, I'm almost thinking like I'm going into the private business world, but almost like the marketing, the recruiting, the interview, like, talk to me about when they came back from a trip until you were launching to the next season. How did you kind of engage those participants to try to help them understand the benefit of serving again in a different, or leading into a leadership capacity, or just coming back?
Well, I will say we did a really good job of keeping leaders engaged. staying in touch with leaders on a monthly basis, honestly, through email campaigns, gifts, end of the year gifts, birthdays, that sort of thing was really good with leaders. And with participants, that's something that I think is now we're sort of following the same sort of plan that we've had with leaders with participants. But at least once a year, sending them, the impact report for all the things that we've done for the year. That was automatic. We would, if we had journeys coming up to places that they had been before, emails, hey, you've been to El Salvador. We have another trip coming up in El Salvador if you're interested. A lot of targeted stuff based on our past participants, like, oh, you have a family. You've been on a family trip before. You went to Florida with Lighthouse. How about let's try Mexico? So it was a little more targeted. But for sure, an impact report annually was what a participant got.
Go geeking out for a second. How did you actually get the data then to segment your audiences in that capacity so that you could, reach out to them for potential opportunities or ways to engage for the next year?
Well, that's what Service Reef did so well for us. You guys helped us build out all of our custom sections within our application and things like that. That was very easy for me to build custom reports on the regular. I would say probably weekly. That's the sort of thing that I liked doing. But it was very easy to segment my data. Like, okay, I want everyone who traveled in the last 2 years to Central America and was on a high school trip or a middle school trip. That kind of reporting was super helpful and very easy and very quick. And of course, I would dedupe it and look for there's always some error in your data, but for the most part, it was good stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So since you've kind of transitioned, there is a question here, Jessica, that I'll ask. Can you share a story of how Service Reef helped you or your team in the past, or what has that journey or experience been like?
Well, I think now that it's on top of my mind, the reporting features were amazing. And also on the main opportunity page, having the numbers summed and reported at the top was super helpful. It saved time. I'm trying to think. I'm gonna need a pause for a minute and think outside of reporting.
Were you there when you guys made that shift? I don't know where your and Michaela's time overlapped. So
yeah, so that was an initiative she had as I was coming on, but it was that idea was her idea, but implemented once I got there. So I don't know a world without it. I can't imagine. So when I first came on, we were training our team on how to use it. And I think the rest of our team, it was a slow adoption for the rest of my team, the folks that weren't necessarily doing logistics, but for, my team, we used it right away. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think another thing that was super helpful from Service Reef, this is more for the rest of the team, that we built for them, was the email features, being able to email certain sections, populations, either within a journey or within a group of journeys. We want to email just the leaders. We want to email just the parents, just the kids, that sort of thing. And being able to schedule emails, it's definitely a feature that my team is using a lot.
You guys do a lot within that younger generation. I think part of it comes from your own story of, hey, this is when all of us can go back to that first time we went on a mission trip, right? And all of a sudden our eyes are open to the rest of the world and what God may be doing. What are some things specifically within kind of Global X? How did you handle student trips? And were there any things that you found that were helpful over the time, as opposed to doing an adult trip or even college?
Student trips, they're a bit of a love-hate because students are a little more unpredictable. especially when they're in country. However, the enthusiasm that they had, I was always impressed with how I mean, their teams would mobilize and get and fundraise, and they would stay together. There'd be less drops, less cancellations than an adult team. But I think one of the most important thing was being able to contact parents and include them on emails specifically was really, really important. Yeah. That's very important. Making sure the parents understand that there's there's a code of conduct, what we're expecting of your student. When fundraising is due, when there are meetings that are mandatory, those sorts of things.
Yeah. Did you end up like, how did you shift? Because I remember coming to an actual in-person training before COVID, right?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the shift that you guys have had to go through in the last 5 years, as far as how you approach certain things, whether it be training, security training, and getting people ready for the field in that space. Has that changed in the last 5 years?
Oh, it changed a ton. A lot because of COVID, but a lot also, I think COVID just sped everything up like it did. We were moving to more digital spaces when COVID happened. And so that kind of made the decision for us. We switched to a learning management system for training our leaders. And ultimately, I think that they'll use the same thing to do a little more training of participants. So kind of take some of the load off of the leaders. We did a lot of video training. So we used to have an in-person security, very important to do security, but do we need a 4-hour in-person meeting for this? Or it's the same information over and over again. So why don't we make a video once and put it out there and make it a required task in Service Reef. It's a task now that must be watched. And so it saved us on manpower for sure, and taking up, staff and participants weekends or evenings. So those are the two big ones. And so now the only in-person stuff is even teams will meet, 4 to 5 times before they travel, and they have options. They can do it however they want, but most of them meet half in person and half on Zoom or virtually.
And since we're kind of in the pre-part, talk to me about the post part. How did you help? Did you run post engagement, like debriefs? Did you do anything that was kind of helping them process? When did that process start? And then kind of what are some things you found successful during that time for post teams?
Well, on a trip, they get to debrief daily, and usually our partners will lead the way on that. So they get a really good debriefs from our partners. We also have our own debrief questions, but so they're super covered in country. And then post country, staff was not leading those debriefs with teams. The leaders do that, but that is part of the process. Is there is a debrief meeting, usually a month to 2 months. 6 weeks is kind of ideal. For after a team to get back together and see how everyone's doing. And then leaders also, staff would meet with leaders specifically and debrief pretty close within two weeks of coming back.
Were there any general trends that you saw within the team leaders coming back that you helped them process or walk through, Jessica? Like, was there kind of, every trip is unique. Experiences are unique. You're going to have, especially with students, behavior challenges. You're going to have other things that come up, right? But like, was there kind of a typical leader experience, especially for maybe those first or second time leaders coming back where you're like, yeah, we kind of saw this a lot, or help them think through it or process through?
Yes, especially for first time leaders. Ideally, we're not sending leaders to a country they've never been to or to a partner they've never been to. Regardless, either way, those first time leaders come back, well, I wish I would have known this, wish I would have known that. And that's usually those are pretty detailed. I wish I knew, like the location they were serving didn't have shade, or we were working with concrete and we were expecting to be working with paint. So those sorts of things you get back and you do your best you can, but missions, missions, the work that you're doing in country changes, the weather changes, there's things going on in that city. There may be a festival or a holiday that we weren't anticipating. So those are typical. And also, challenging teammates, challenging people to lead. That was always a common, there's always one or two that are difficult, and maybe ones that they didn't necessarily anticipate being difficult. But once you get in country, you learn people very quickly. So those are the two things that we would normally encounter. And also how much they people love them. So overall it's gushing, and I would lead again and I would go again. And that was generally the feedback.
Yeah. No, that's great. And then kind of introducing them to that alumni of leaders now of like, okay, now we engage throughout the year to try to groom that again. So it just totally makes sense.
Yeah. And please go back and serve in the same place you went, because you have a leg up now. You know what to, you know a lot of those variables now. You have answers for.
Oh, makes sense. Couple questions here. Kind of closing up. Jessica, from your experience, is there one piece of advice you can share with others that are maybe coming into this mission space or trying to grow into this missions or mobilization space?
Yes, actually, I met with a church that's trying to start a missions department, and they have a lot of heart for it. They have people that want to go. They have places they want to go. Not a lot of thought has been put into everything required to get to that point. So I think what I specifically did, and my team did, that it tends to be like an afterthought. And I would say absolutely not. Like, you want a successful, safe, mission experience, you need a team that's planning. You need someone who's very detailed and thinks through future steps, future planning. Yeah. So more effort needs to be put into that, I think.
Do you think it would be helpful to have kind of that framework of like, here's all the different things you need to consider without trying to overwhelm someone stepping into that space, right, Jessica? But at the same time going, you need a certain awareness that this is a lot more than you're thinking if you're going to do it well and find a way to be sustainable in that. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And I think there are, a basic list of, how are you going to get, who's going to book airfare? What do you have a mechanism for fundraising? What about, have you thought about travel insurance? Who's paying attention to the safety in the country? Who's in charge on the ground? Are we responsible back in the States for what's happening, or do you have a partner that's, is equipped to do that? That sort of thing. And when, I guess, in the timeline, when are these things required?
You kind of talk about the partner, and I would say, like, especially if you can successfully send a team in there and then trust that they're actually running a lot of stuff. Tell me a little bit about your journey with partner engagement. How did you keep those folks involved and or build relationship? Did you get feedback from them? Were there different things that you did to kind of maybe help with those partners and working alongside those so that the teams had success and then the partners felt that success as well?
Yes, I think we did that very well. That was definitely an area where I think, North Point Global X can help others. We had a very close relationship with our partners. At the very least, monthly conversations with them, whether we were sending a team to them or not, there was a monthly touch point. And then when there was a team going, it's even more regular, frequent contact. So we know everything that the partner knows, we know. So it's none of it's really a surprise as far as where they're staying, how they're getting there, who in country is going to be working with them, whether they have translators, all of that.
Were there, similar to the framework you're kind of talking about in just sending a trip, within you just listed off several questions there for like partners, right? Like, hey,
Uh,
we want you to help receive well, and we
yeah,
want to send well. So we're all on the same
yeah,
expectation.
yeah.
How did you end up facilitating that between team leaders, or just over time because you knew here's the
Mhm.
expectation that you could kind of like trust that partner, or was it like still a checkbox like each time? Like give me a little bit of the background, behind the scenes, Jessica, of what it was like to kind of help prepare that partner or understand that from the what are your needs for this year, right?
Mhm.
Through hey, we're about to send a team next week, just here's our final roster kind of thing. Can you give me an idea of what that looks like?
Yeah, so almost probably a year out, maybe a little more than a year, maybe just out a year is when we're asking, okay, what do you need? What do you anticipate needing in the coming year? And that would be sort of season by season. So right now we're in March. All right, next spring, what kind of, what kind of capacity, what do you want? Do you want a team? Do you want two teams? So we're planning that very, very far out. Uh, And then we have standard templates that go to a partner every time there is a team that's going, um, so we're on the regular, it's not going to be forgotten. We want to know, where's the team staying? Um, where do we need to fly in and out of? Uh, Here's the roster of people. This, who needs to room with who, passport information, food allergies, any kind of stuff that's shared with the partner, with every partner along the way. Um, so that part's pretty standardized.
Was there a feedback mechanism with the partner as well, just like with the team lead and others?
Yeah, so we would debrief with a partner as well after a journey, after a team came back. So we got that feedback. And if we had feedback from the leader and the participants, because leaders and participants would get a survey from us, we would send it the day after a journey, and then send it again. I think a week after. We would send it, at least twice out to people. So if there's any feedback in there that we thought was relevant for the partner, we would share it with them as well, and work on it if we thought it was, definitely something that needed to be addressed. And then we would survey partners on maybe annually on hey, how's it going with us? What do you need from us? And we also would have we would have sort of large group settings for our partners, quarterly touch points, like, hey, let's all get together and talk about a particular, subject matter. And so outside of just sending teams, just relational building and connecting partnerships, partners that were doing similar work in either the same area of the country, of the world, or different areas, but doing the same sort of ministry.
No, that's great. One more question kind of on that you just made me think about, though. Like, how do you communicate? So you kind of had an impact book or an impact at the end, but how did you like communicate your impact within Global X, like more to the
Mhm,
church as a whole, where,
mhm,
and kind of sharing, here's some of the cool stories or the impact
mhm,
things, like
mhm,
how, what were you either capturing as far as data goes and then
mhm.
sharing, or what did you find to be effective when sharing to the larger organization or the larger church?
Yes. So we definitely, I would say, we definitely would share in whatever capacity we could, whatever the churches would allow us to, seasonally. So after every season, combining, my job would be the quantitative part of it. These are the numbers. These are the miles. This is how much we flew. This is how much we drove. These are how many people we sent. This is how many, this is how many dollars we raised seasonally. And then from those surveys, getting permission to share people's stories. We also have an opportunity in the survey, like, hey, if you have more that you want to share, can we call you? And so just a way to start gathering and sharing stories. And then annually, that impact report that would be mailed out, emailed and or physically mailed out, and with all the same sorts of numbers, quantitative and qualitative.
That's awesome. All right. So just as we're wrapping up, Jessica, any book recommendations or podcast things that you found to be helpful as you were kind of being either in the space or growing yourself
Oh
during that
yeah,
time?
for sure. So I have a three. The book "When Helping Hurts" I think everyone who's involved in missions needs to be aware of that book, and the principles that it's trying to explain. A similar book that I think is a little bit easier to read is called If You Really Want to Help. That's more story driven, and it's based on the same principles, but just kind of a little more heartfelt. You get a lot more stories into it. And then locally in Atlanta, we have a network called the Global Outreach Network that tries to connect missions, missions pastors around the country to just brainstorm, share ideas, gather together. They 2 or 3 times a year, and I find that super helpful. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Was that a virtual gathering or a in-person gathering?
So they would do virtual stuff like monthly, and then they would have 2 or 3 in-person gatherings a year. Yeah. And it's fairly new, but I think they're doing great work. And I think it's definitely needed because it's, within a church, we were lucky. My church had a large missions department, but, you find a lot of churches have 1 or 2, and usually people are wearing multiple hats. And so they're very isolated, and, it's stressful. Like I said, a lot of details go into into missions, and you're sending people into another country, so there's a lot of risk involved, and when you have one person at a church trying to manage that, it's a lot.
It is. So say that again. It was the missions out. What was the name of it?
Global Outreach Network.
Global Outreach Networks. What is the one Excel function you find yourself using most when analyzing or figuring out data?
Oh man, so many. I love that unique function in Excel. It's pretty awesome. I do a lot of VLOOKUPs, a ton of VLOOKUPs when I'm searching for, names and corresponding emails, or names and corresponding journeys. And because, like I said, we do have returners. So some combination of using that unique function and a VLOOKUP to get my set of emails was what I would do on the regular basis.
No, that makes sense. I was going to say, because VLOOKUP will only look up the first time it shows. So you have to at least do the unique
Yeah,
first.
so I would
then,
have to,
you're like, Awesome. Anything else for today, Jessica?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Appreciate your time and spending out today. Again, this is Jessica Arnette, who's worn a lot of hats at Global X as well as in other things. And thank you so much for your time today, Jessica. Appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to do it. And I'm happy that Service Reef has been so helpful to Global X.